It's a phrase we hear constantly these days. Toxic. Toxic workplaces, toxic positivity, toxic exes. It's almost become a buzzword, something we slap onto anything unpleasant. But when you strip away the social media jargon and really look at the mechanics of human connection, there is a very specific, very dangerous dynamic that happens when we are consistently around people who deplete us. We're talking about moving on from toxic people today, from relationships that drain us, from voices that never build us up, only tear us down. And more importantly, we're talking about how choosing peace is not selfish. It's necessary.
That word, necessary, is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, Jake. And it should, because we often treat our social circles like they're just scenery in our lives. But the research tells us they are more like the weather system we live inside. If that weather is constantly storming, you're going to get wet, you're going to get cold, and eventually you're going to get sick.
So let's start with the definition, because I think that's where people get stuck. We have this movie villain idea of a toxic person, someone who is screaming, throwing things, openly abusive. But the text that sparked this episode actually points out something much more insidious. It says, toxic people aren't always loud. They're not always cruel to your face.
Exactly. That is the misconception that keeps people trapped. If they aren't hitting you, or if they aren't screaming insults, you tell yourself, well, it's not that bad. Maybe I'm just being sensitive. But toxicity often shows up as a low-level, chronic hum of negativity. It's criticism disguised as just being honest. It's doubt. It's mistrust.
The I'm just playing devil's advocate friend.
Right. Or the partner who never acknowledges your growth, but has a photographic memory for your mistakes. The text mentioned this specific dynamic. They never acknowledge your growth, but they're quick to point out your flaws. That asymmetry is key. In a healthy relationship, there's a balance of give and take. In a toxic one, you are the designated carrier of the emotional baggage.
They don't help you carry the weight, but they're always ready to comment on how you should be carrying it. That line really struck me. It's the backseat driver of your life.
And think about the energy required to manage that. We have this limited bucket of cognitive and emotional resources every day. When you are around someone who critiques how you carry the weight, your brain is forced to allocate a huge amount of energy just to defense mechanisms. You are constantly monitoring your tone, your words, your posture, trying to avoid the critique. Psychologists actually refer to this state as walking on eggshells, but biologically, it's a sustained fight or flight response.
So it's not just hurt feelings, it's physiological.
It is entirely physiological. There's a concept called emotional contagion. We are wired to mimic and mirror the emotions of those around us. It's an evolutionary survival trait. If the tribe is scared, I should be scared too. But in a modern context, if you are sitting across from someone who is leaking anxiety, cynicism, or hostility, your nervous system actually starts to synchronize with theirs. You literally catch their stress. So when we say these people drain us, it's not a metaphor. Your body is working overtime to metabolize their negativity.
That explains that feeling of exhaustion. You have coffee with a certain friend and afterward you feel like you need a 3-hour nap, but you haven't done anything physically strenuous.
You have, though. You've been performing emotional gymnastics to keep the peace. And over time, being around that kind of energy does something dangerous. It wears you down. It erodes your baseline for what you think you deserve.
I want to play devil's advocate for a second here. Not the toxic kind, hopefully, but isn't there a danger in labeling everyone who challenges us as toxic? I mean, sometimes friends should criticize us. Sometimes we are wrong. If I cut off everyone who makes me feel bad, am I just creating an echo chamber?
That is a vital distinction. A good friend who challenges you says, hey, I think you made a mistake here, and I know you can do better. That's constructive. It's rooted in love and a belief in your potential. A toxic dynamic attacks your character, not your actions. It says, you always do this. You're so selfish. You're too sensitive.
It's the difference between you did something bad and you are bad.
Precisely. And also look at the ratio. Research into relationship stability, specifically the work of Dr. John Gottman, suggests you need a ratio of about 5 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction to maintain a healthy bond. In toxic relationships, that ratio is inverted. You're lucky if you get 1 crumb of validation for every 5 critiques. So no, protecting yourself from that isn't about avoiding growth. It's about surviving.
Okay, so let's say a listener recognizes this. They're hearing this and thinking, oh no, that's my brother or that's my colleague. The logical step is to distance yourself, but that is where the guilt comes in, and it is crushing. Why do we feel so guilty for protecting ourselves?
Because we've been socialized to believe that access to us is a right, not a privilege, especially with family or long-term friends. There is this deep-seated script that says loyalty means enduring pain. If you leave, you're the bad guy. You're the one breaking the contract.
And the toxic person is usually very good at reinforcing that script, right? They don't go quietly.
Oh, absolutely not. When you try to set a boundary with a toxic person, they don't say, I respect your needs. They say, you're abandoning me after everything I've done for you. They weaponize your empathy against you. Brené Brown has spoken about this beautifully. She distinguishes between guilt and grief. Often when we cut someone off, we feel what we think is guilt, but it's actually grief. We are grieving the relationship we wanted to have while accepting the reality of the relationship we actually have.
That's a heavy realization. You're grieving the potential, the what if.
Yes, and the guilt is often a way to avoid that grief. Because if I feel guilty, it implies I still have control. It implies that if I just tried harder or was less selfish, I could fix it. Admitting that a relationship is toxic means admitting that you are powerless to change the other person, and that is terrifying.
So how do we move from that paralysis of guilt into actual action? Because the text says choosing peace is necessary. But practical application, how do you actually do that when it's your mom or your boss?
You have to change the goal. In a toxic dynamic, your goal has usually been make them understand me, make them treat me better. You have to stop trying to get water from a dry well. The new goal becomes protect my peace.
Which might not mean a dramatic exit, right? It doesn't always have to be the table flip moment.
Rarely is it a table flip. In fact, dramatic exits often feed the toxicity because they give the other person ammo to say, see, look how unstable they are. It's often quieter. It's what therapists call the gray rock method.
Make yourself as boring as a gray rock.
Exactly. You stop providing the emotional fuel. They criticize you, you say, okay, I hear you, and you change the subject. They try to bait you into an argument, you don't bite. You become uninteresting to their chaos. That is a form of leaving, even if you're still in the room. You're leaving the game.
I love that. Leaving the game. But let's talk about the aftermath. Because once you actually create that distance, whether it's physical no contact or just emotional gray rocking, there's this vacuum. You've been so used to the noise, the drama, the defense. What happens when it goes quiet?
It can feel incredibly lonely. We mistake intensity for intimacy. If you've grown up in or spent years in chaotic relationships, peace feels boring. It feels wrong. You might find yourself checking your phone, almost wishing for a crisis, because your nervous system is addicted to the cortisol spike.
It's like withdrawal.
It is withdrawal. You have to retrain your brain to accept safety. You have to learn that a boring Tuesday night where no one is mad at you is actually a victory. That is what choosing inner peace over constant depletion looks like in practice. It looks like boredom. It looks like silence. And eventually, it looks like freedom.
I think that's the part people miss. They think moving on is this triumphant montage of success, but usually it's just sitting in a room, feeling a bit sad, but knowing you're safe.
And knowing that the energy you used to spend defending yourself is now yours to keep. That's the ROI of leaving. You get your brain back, you get your creativity back. You suddenly realize, wow, I have all this space to think about what I want, instead of constantly anticipating what they will think.
There's a historical context here too, isn't there? This idea of cutting people off seems very modern. 50 years ago, you just stuck it out. You stayed in the bad marriage, you tolerated the abusive uncle. Is this a sign of us getting softer or getting smarter?
I'd argue we're becoming more clinically aware. In the past, the survival of the community or the family unit was prioritized over the mental health of the individual. You tolerated the toxic uncle because you needed the village to survive the winter, metaphorically speaking. But we now have the data on what that tolerance does to a person long term. We know about the link between chronic stress and autoimmune diseases, heart disease, depression. We aren't softer. We just understand the cost better now. We know the bill is too high.
The bill is too high. That's a great way to put it. You're paying with your life, essentially.
You are. And to go back to the user's text, choosing peace is not selfish. It's necessary. If you are depleted, you are of no use to the people who do love you. You can't be a good parent, a good partner, or a good friend if you are constantly recovering from the damage inflicted by a toxic person.
It reminds me of the oxygen mask analogy on airplanes, but it's almost deeper than that. It's not just putting on the mask. It's moving to a different seat where the oxygen is actually flowing.
And realizing you don't owe anyone your suffocation. That is the hardest pill to swallow. You can wish them well, you can hope they heal, but you don't have to be the collateral damage of their unhealed trauma. You can love them from a distance where you are safe.
So, for the listener who is right on the edge, who knows exactly who we are talking about but is terrified to make the move, what is the one thing they need to hold on to?
Trust the relief. If the idea of not seeing this person brings you a wave of relief, followed by a wave of guilt, trust the relief. The relief is your body telling you the truth. The guilt is just your conditioning trying to keep you in the cage.
Trust the relief. I think that's the compass right there. Rachel, this has been an incredible breakdown of something that is so hard to navigate. Thank you for making it so clear.
Thank you, Jake. It's an important conversation.
And to everyone listening, if this episode sparked a realization for you, or if you know someone who is currently carrying that heavy weight we talked about, please send this to them.